Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Sometimes All It Takes to See Is to Look. This will be Part 11, Chapter 11, entitled Friends. Izuku walks into the classroom right as the bell rang, rushing to his seat quickly to avoid his classmates' expected questions. He really doesn't want to deal with it today, or ever, but he can practically feel his classmates' eyes boring into the back of his head from where it's resting against the desk. He knows that they can be nosy, a fact that really overwhelmed him at the beginning of the year, but their hearts are in the right place at least. Monoma, from his new place right in front of Izuku, spares him no glance, and Izuku really doesn't have the energy to try to befriend him today. After all, he was the one that brought up Kachan's bullying. He really couldn't blame him, though. Not completely. It was bound to be dug up eventually, plus Monoma had to be given a reason for his switch. Izuku just wishes it hadn't been the day Kachan moved classes. Really, what rotten luck. He just wants the past to stay in the past. He's fine. Kachan isn't even in their class anymore. Wow. So there's really no use dredging up the bad blood between them. Izuku already had to go through that mess with Aizawa-sensei, and he's not particularly fond of doing it again with his friends. For all he knows, they'll hate him for it. Though Aizawa-sensei didn't. He's just not sure. The moment class ends for lunch, he runs out of the classroom, ignoring the words sent his way. He really doesn't want to talk about it. It's fine. He'll find somewhere to eat by himself today, and hopefully they'll all forget about it by tomorrow. He's walking fast and looking down at his shoes as he does, so he manages to bump into someone, causing them to stumble back. "Oh, sorry. I really need to look where I'm going." Izuku puts his arms out to steady the other person, only to freeze when he sees who it is. Shinso-kun. Izuku can't help but remember the last time they spoke, and how pathetic he was to let some silly words get to him like they did. It wasn't like he hadn't heard enough cruel words to last a lifetime already. What's a few more? But he can't find it in himself to hold it against Shinso for what he said. He was right, after all. Izuku's hobby is weird and creepy, and it makes sense that Shinso didn't want anything to do with him. It's Izuku's fault for wanting to connect with someone who reminds him of himself, when Shinso can't see that connection. All he knows is Hero Izuku, not middle school Izuku. The younger, weaker, useless Izuku that still exists, if only in his mind. If only that one could just disappear. The world is unfair. Ochako knows this. She's experienced this. Her family was not well off, and she wasn't saying this to compare her troubles to other people's, just that she knew things could be unfair sometimes. She hated it. She hated how unfair everything was. How the kindest person she knew could have been treated wrongly. It wasn't fair. Deku-kun didn't deserve to be bullied by anyone, and now she feels like Bakugo doesn't deserve to be a hero. What kind of hero hurts others? But it's not like she knows the full extent of the story, and she doesn't want to make any assumptions, but just knowing that he bullied her sweet friend, that he bullied him at all, was enough for her to get mad. When Kirishima asked that question, she didn't know what she was expecting to happen. The news that Bakugo had switched classes was strange, to say the least. He was pretty brash, kind of rude, honestly, but he did good work. He would be a good hero. Switching classes was weird, but she honestly didn't care that much. Sure, she wants to get along with all of her classmates, and it'd be helpful to build relationships for the future, but Bakugo has never been her favorite person. He was especially rude to Deku-kun, and had been since the beginning. She should have known. She really should have. She should have done something. It wasn't fair to Ochako's friend for her to overlook something like this. He deserves to have friends who help. She can't believe she ever thought Bakugo was Deku-kun's friend. He's nothing but a big jerk. And now, watching as Deku avoids them all, practically sprinting out of the classroom during lunch, Ochako can't help but feel kind of responsible. Deku was her best friend. She should have seen that he was overwhelmed and helped him out, not forcing him to resort to running away from their classmates. She should have said something to prevent the class from pestering him this morning. Though, it looked like he didn't even hear most of their questions, and they had to stop once Aizawa-sensei walked in to start class. Deku must have gotten to class later on purpose, just to avoid everyone. Ochako wanted to cry, out of frustration. Deku shouldn't have to feel like he needs to avoid everyone. They were the ones who needed to respect his boundaries and not ask personal questions. Ochako nods to herself as she enters the lunchroom behind her other friends. She'll have to fix this somehow. She needs to show Deku that she cares about him, and make sure the others don't pester him. Simple, right? Midoriya? Hitoshi furrows his brows a bit. He didn't expect to run into him in the hallway again so soon. And why was he practically running away from his classroom? the opposite direction to the cafeteria. Sorry, I'll just... Midoriya squeaks out, sidestepping and making to walk away. But Hitoshi stops him by putting a hand on his arm briefly. Now was a better time than any to apologize, since it had been a few days. Wait, just a second. He rubs the back of his neck. Listen, I was pretty rude to you on Friday, so sorry about that. Hitoshi cringes internally. That was the lamest apology he ever heard. No way he would be forgiven. What? Oh, no, no! Midoriya waves his arms in front of his face. You don't have to apologize for that. It was my fault. I should be the one apologizing. Hitoshi feels his eyebrows raise unintentionally, and he gives the green-eyed a deadpan stare. Is he serious? He thinks that he should apologize for asking about Hitoshi's quirk? Yeah, he was pretty mad at the time, but knowing what he does now, he can only be utterly astounded at that. Hitoshi was the one who was rude and said all that mean stuff about him. All Midoriya wanted was to get to know him more. Seeing that Hitoshi was still staring at him in disbelief, though you couldn't tell by looking at his face, Midoriya continued talking. I mean, I shouldn't have assumed you want to talk to me, or that you want to talk about your quirk. It seemed like somewhat of a sore subject when we fought at the sports festival, but it's just so interesting, and it would be so useful for heroics. Oh, I'm sorry, I know you don't want to talk about it, and me asking all the time was probably annoying. Hitoshi grabbed his shoulders to stop the torrent of words. Midoriya's mouth shut abruptly. Midoriya, you don't need to apologize. I was the only one who was rude. Hitoshi lets go and takes a step back, shoving his hands in his pockets. I made assumptions about you that I know aren't true now, and thought you were only talking to me to make fun of me or something. It was my bad, really. So you don't apologize. That was better. See, Hitoshi could apologize correctly when it mattered. Midoriya just stared up at him, eyes wide and blinking. It took a minute for him to break out of his stupor. It's okay. He starts waving his hands again more rapidly. I would never make fun of you, Shinso-kun. And I am sorry that I made you uncomfortable, though, so I can't not apologize for that at least. Fine. Then you're forgiven. There's an awkward lull in their conversation where neither of them speak. After a moment of Midoriya biting his lip and twiddling with his fingers nervously, he asked, do you maybe want to join me for lunch? Since we're good now. Hitoshi cocks his head to the side and questioned, why isn't he eating with his classmates? Does it have something to do with why he was seemingly running away from his classroom? Did something happen with your classmates? Hitoshi is a very blunt person, and he's genuinely curious, although he'd not talked to the majority of Class 1A outside of the sports festival, and that one instance when he declared war on them, which is a little embarrassing to think about now. Midoriya's friends seem cheery, and the boy himself always seems happy around them. Hitoshi must have guessed right, because his companion tenses slightly. I guess. I just don't want to talk to them about something, and they keep asking about it. He brings a hand up to rub at the back of his head nervously. Was it about being quirkless? Shoot, Hitoshi did not mean to ask that out loud. His brain-to-mouth filter must be faulty today, probably the lack of sleep. Aizawa-sensei had asked him not to mention it since there is not really a reason he should know, unless someone tells him. And since Midoriya definitely didn't tell him, the greenhead will probably assume someone broke his trust. Not that Hitoshi cares that he used to be quirkless in any way or the other, but he knows that quirkless people get a lot of crap from others. One thing that comforted him, when people called him villainous, was the fact that at least he wasn't quirkless. So now Midoriya is frozen, looking up at him with wide green eyes and a slightly wobbling lip being gnawed between his teeth. It doesn't matter. Hitoshi interrupts the nervous stammering a little too loudly, causing Midoriya to jerk back a little in surprise. Sorry, he continues at a more appropriate volume. But it doesn't matter if you have a quirk or not. Now Midoriya is blinking at him, thankfully with more confusion than fear, as if he should be afraid of Hitoshi. Listen, I'm guessing you got all kinds of crap from people when you didn't have your quirk, right? Hitoshi sees him nod minutely. They said I was useless. It's barely a whisper. Hitoshi purses his lips. Well, so did I. People were always telling me how my quirk was villainous, and the only thing I would amount to would be villainy. His lips curl in disgust at the memory. UA was exponentially better than any other school, but some people still made an effort to avoid him. But that's not true. You'll make a great hero, Shinso-kun. Midoriya's eyes go back to shining. Really, he has so much encouragement for everyone but himself. Exactly. If what they said about me wasn't true, why would it be about you? His eyebrows furrow in response. All previous fear of judgment dispelled, it seems, in exchange for confusion. I didn't have a quirk at all, though. It's different. Hitoshi rolls his eyes. So other quirkless people are useless? Midoriya yelps. No, definitely not. He shakes his head vigorously. Then you aren't either. And never were. Quirk or no quirk, it doesn't matter. Midoriya opens his mouth, but then shuts it without saying anything. His face scrunches up in what must be consideration of Hitoshi's words. If your classmates can't accept that, Hitoshi shrugs. Just beat them up. Midoriya's head whips up to look at him in apprehension. I can't beat up my classmates. Hitoshi shrugs again, putting a smirk on his face. Sure you can. You're really strong, you know, those muscles. Hitoshi whistles lowly. Big macho. Midoriya splutters, a blush creeping up his cheeks, but has a tiny smile on his face anyways. Unfortunately, it falls away after a moment. That's not what I was really avoiding them for, though. He trails off towards the end, delving into a mutter storm that is significantly faster than what Hitoshi's brain can process. He can only make out a bit in the middle when he hears his name. Maybe they'll react like Shinso, but what if they don't? And I don't want them to hate Kachan after learning what he did. Hey, whoa, what did this Kachan do, and why would your classmates hate him for it? Midoriya squeaks and slaps a hand over his mouth. Oh, so he didn't mean for Hitoshi to hear that. Hitoshi puts his hands in front of him placatingly. You don't have to tell me if it's personal. No big deal. Midoriya removes his hand slowly, seeming to scrutinize his face. Hitoshi just stares at him with his neutral expression. He doesn't want it to seem like he's forcing Midoriya to talk to him, or anything like that, since it seems like that's what his classmates are trying to do, and it's making him uncomfortable. Yeah, it's personal. Midoriya gives him a wobbly smile. Thank you. Hitoshi gives him one of his more subdued grins in return. No problem. Now, what's this about lunch? Izuku was feeling a lot better after lunch. He had been so stressed out, being around his classmates and their constant questioning, he felt like he couldn't even think. He was very grateful for Shinso talking with him and apologizing, though he does wonder how he knows about his previous quirklessness. He forgot to ask, with everything else that was said, plus the conversation they had while they were eating was so light and carefree. Izuku didn't want to get into stuff like that again after the tone of their conversation had relaxed. Plus, Shinso didn't care that he was quirkless. It was great because that means that 3 people now know, besides his mom and Kachan, and they don't care or treat him differently. He has a little more hope for his classmates now. Of course, his previous quirklessness wasn't something he wanted to bring up at all, even if he had to explain the bullying. Though, it only made sense that it would come into play. After all, it was the whole reason Kachan started bullying him in the first place, and the reason he couldn't fight back. So maybe it would be okay if he told everyone. He really cares for his classmates and doesn't want to think negatively about them, so he's pretty sure most of them won't care. Shinso didn't, and they're not even really friends. Yet. He's working on it. Anyways, Izuku still returns to the classroom with barely a moment to spare. Just because he feels more okay about talking with everything doesn't mean he wants to be bombarded with questions. He'll do it on his own time, in his own way. Yeah, if he can control the situation, that'd make him feel better about it. Maybe he can talk to Aizawa-sensei and say something at the beginning of class tomorrow? He spends the last portion of classes that day slightly zoned out. He still takes notes, but he is very much in autopilot. Izuku can practically feel his mind buzzing with what he's going to do, how his classmates will react, what questions they will have. It's a lot to think about. Before he knows it, the day is over. Once again, he can feel the focus of the room shift towards him. No one leaves the room, sans Monoma, as Izuku packs his things slowly, doing his best to ignore their heated gazes. He feels a tap on his shoulder. Great. He prepares himself to be questioned when he hears a sweet, Deku-kun. Izuku looks up to see a smiling Uraraka. We missed you at lunch. I hope you're doing okay. He blinks a few times. Wasn't she going to ask? Oh, I'm fine. I ate with Shinso-kun today. He rubs the back of his head anxiously. Shinso? Uraraka taps her chin thoughtfully. Is he the one from Gen Ed that you fought at the sports festival? Yeah. Izuku finds himself smiling. He can feel some of the pressure lessening as he talks with one of his best friends. His first friend, after years of being a social outcast. He's really nice, and his quirk is super cool. Wow, maybe next time he can eat with all of us, then I can get to know him too. Uraraka bounces on her toes lightly, as Izuku finally stands. I'll ask him sometime. He slings his bag over his shoulders. Not exactly friends yet, but definitely once I get to know him more. Uraraka latches onto his arm as they make their way out of the room, and he practically forgets about his other classmates as he talks with his friend. Lovely, sweet Uraraka, who he eventually notices glaring at anyone who attempts to approach him. He can't even be upset. By the time they make it out of the gates of UA, Izuku's feeling lighter than he has all day. See you tomorrow, Deku-kun. Uraraka waves enthusiastically as they part ways to go to their separate homes. Bye, Uraraka, and thank you. She looks surprised for a moment, as though she hadn't expected him to notice. But then she grins at him, and Izuku smiles back brightly. His friends are the best. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 11 of Sometimes All It Takes to See Is to Look. Chapter 12 will be up next. I hope you all are still enjoying this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.